The case where they're not home at all until after Purim is actually its own discussion. That's not for right now. But take a look at source number 2, where the Ramah, Rabbi Isserlis writes, Im sholech manot l're'ehu. If somebody sends portions to somebody else, sends the shalach manos to somebody else, v'hu eino rotzeh lekablam, and the recipient does not want to accept them. Omo chalo, or he forgives it, he said, it's okay, I don't need it. The Ramah says, yatsa, you fulfilled your mitzvah. You did your job by sending shalach manos, and it's okay that the recipient said, no thank you. Clear? Okay. So the Chasam Sofer, Moshe Sofer, analyzed this halacha. And he said it actually depends on why we send shalach manos. Obviously we send shalach manos because Megillas Esther says that they enacted mishloach manot ish l're'ehu, that people should send portions to each other. But what is the benefit of mishloach manot? What's the rationale for mishloach manot? Why do we send them? What would you say? Why do we send shalach manos?
Acts of friendship.
Acts of friendship. I mean, it's good for us to be friends all the time. Why on Purim specifically?
To commemorate the event.
To commemorate the event. How does that commemorate the event?
Achdus.
What does Achdus have to do with the event? What does Achdus have to do with Purim? Yes?
So Haman, when he told Achashverosh, talked about the Jews, is Mufura, etc. They don't get along with one another. Never mind with us, they don't get along with themselves. So we're saying Shlach Manot to show the world that we do get along with them.
Good. So Howard says the issue of Mishloach Manot, the goal of Mishloach Manot is effectively to counter and to delegitimize what Haman said about the Jews. Haman says we are mefuzar meforad, we are scattered, and we're not. We're actually a united people, at least one day a year. If you take a look at source number 4, this is an idea that's presented by Rav Shlomo Halevi Al-Kabetz in his Manos Halevi commentary to Megillas Esther. Rav Shlomo Halevi Al-Kabetz is best known for writing what? Lecha Dodi. That's right. If you have a Birnbaum Siddur, I think the Art Scroll also notes him as the author of Lecha Dodi. He's also the brother-in-law of Rav Moshe Cordovero. So that means, then you know already, he's 16th century Sfat. And look what he says in source number 4, commenting on Perek Tet, chapter 9 of Megillas Esther. He says, Osim Yom Yadalet Simcha Mishtav Yom Tov Mishlach Manos Ish Lo Yayu. They make the 14th day of Adar a day of joy, feasting Yom Tov Mishlach Manot. Why? As they acted as one person to gather each with the other, the opposite of the false speech of the foe and enemy who said one nation is scattered. They gathered, they unitedly, hikahel, they united together in prayer, and they united together as a nation. We want to be unified, and therefore, on Purim, we send each other gifts of food. That's one idea. It's not the only idea. Jump back in your source to source number 3. Rabbi Yisrael Isserlein, writing in 15th century Austria, the Trumas Adeshen, says, that's not what Shalach Manos is about. He was asked a question. People had a practice of sending each other, as you see in my translation in source number 3, the people sent clothing. People sent linens to each other in honor of Purim. And the question is, do you fulfill Shalach Manos with a gift like that? And his answer is, nope. He says it doesn't work. Why? Because the goal of Mishloach Manot, as far as he is concerned, is to provide for the Seudat Purim, to provide items for the Purim meal. It may be true that by the end of the meal, you may need a blanket and a pillow. However, that's a different topic for one of the later shiurim. But the issue here is, you need to provide fixings for a meal. The blanket doesn't count. It has to be food. So the Chasam Sofer, Moshe Sofer, looks at these two different perspectives on Shalach Manos. One, I'm sending Shalach Manos in order to unify everybody. Or two, I'm sending Shalach Manos in order to provide what people need for the meal. And he says, well, then you're going to get two different perspectives on whether you fulfill Shalach Manos if the recipient rejects them. On the one hand, if the recipient says, thanks but no thanks, you created unity. They know you wanted to give them a gift, even if they said, I don't need it, but they still have that heartwarming feeling if somebody wanted to give me something. On the other hand, if it's providing for their meal, you didn't provide for their meal. Therefore, you didn't fulfill Shalach Manos. So the Chasam Sofer, Moshe Sofer, says, it appears that the Ramah, Rabbi Isserlis, is following the view of Shlomo Halevi al-Kabetz, that the goal is unity, and that's why this works. That's what the Chasam Sofer seems to say. And that's something you'll hear that shir every Purim somewhere. People like this idea. It's a very interesting idea. The problem is it doesn't really work. One reason it doesn't really work is the Trumas Hadesh and Rabbi Yisrael Isserlein in source number 3 was a principal architect of Ashkenazi halacha. Rabbi Moshe Isserlis often quotes the Trumas Hadeshen and follows him. Rabbi Shlomo Halevi al-Kabetz, while a brilliant Rav, very good poet, was writing in a commentary to Megillas Esther. He wasn't writing a work of law. And it wasn't, he's not somebody, a 16th century Sephardi Rav in Israel is not likely to be the one who Rabbi Moshe Isserlis follows in Paskening Halacha. It doesn't really fit. That's number one. Number two, when you look at his words, Rabbi Alkabetz's words in source number 4, he's telling a story. He's simply saying, this is what the Jews did. They wanted to show they're unified. They're not like what Haman said, and therefore they sent gifts. He wasn't making a halachic statement that this is what Mishloach Manot are like. Number 3, when you look in our works of law, they clearly follow the view of the Trumas Hadeshen. For example, the Rambam in source number 5, I'm not going to read it out in the interests of time, but the Rambam writes in source number 5, here is the obligation for your meal. This is what you do for your meal. And then he says, one is in the same halacha, you're obligated to send gifts of food to each other. It's very clear the Rambam believes that the gifts of food, Mishloach Manot, are really about providing the means for the Seudah, for the meal. So here, all the evidence stacks up to say that Mishloach Manot is really about providing for somebody's meal. The idea of unity is a nice idea, but it's not the core halacha here. So what's going on? So Rav Asher Weiss, in his Minchas Asher, which I brought you in source number 6, Hebrew is at the bottom of one side, my English translation is the top of the second side, he says, everybody agrees with the view of the Trumas Hadesh, Rabbi Yisserlein. He says, it appears logical to say, they didn't disagree regarding the halachic parameters of the mitzvah. Everyone agrees giving the portions, giving Mishloach Manot, I haven't actually done the formal translation, Mishloach, sending, Manot, portions. Everyone agrees that giving the portions is for the needs of the meal, as per Trumat Hadesh and per Rabbi Isserlein. It appears that the Manot Halevi, Rabbi Al-Kabetz, did not write his words other than as an added reason, homiletically, as Musar. The idea is we should all learn that, we should be unified. He wasn't making a halachic statement. And therefore it appears clear. Rabbi Moshe Isserlis meant, one fulfills his duty, even if the gift is rejected, not because he has fulfilled the reason for the mitzvah, but even though he hasn't fulfilled the reason for the mitzvah, he has fulfilled the mitzvah because you're not obligated to do more than send. In other words, the way to understand why you fulfill Shalach Manos, even if the person turns it down, is relatively simple. I worked hard. I put together a basket. It has a nice gift of food. It's even the Mediterranean diet food that the Misrad HaBriyut recommended. It's got nuts. It's got olive oil. It has some whole wheat rolls. And I brought it to the person's house, and they said, no, thank you. What am I supposed to do? I did everything I could do. That's why I fulfilled Mishloach Manot. Because my job is not to accept it on his behalf. My job is simply to send it. Check. I did it. Did we create unity? Maybe. Did I provide for his meal? No. But what else was I supposed to do? I sent. The person didn't accept. Yotze. That's what the Ramah is saying. The upshot of this, and the reason why I'm dragging you through this discussion, is that that what we're saying here is this. There are 2 tiers to the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot. The first level is your goal is to provide something that the recipient will use at their meal. That's what we're trying to accomplish. Which tells us what's the answer regarding the flowers? They're nice, you can have them on the table at the meal, but that's not really what Mishloach Manot is supposed to be. Mishloach Manot is supposed to be food, and ideally, food that someone will actually use at their Purim Seudah. That's really what we're supposed to go for. That's number 1. But number 2, Rabbi Shlomo Halevi Alkabetz's point is well taken, which is he's telling us that there is a message of unity in it, and I think that's really important in framing how we fulfill Mishloach Manot. I don't think we should discount or discard what he's saying, even if it's not the reason for the mitzvah. And in order to grasp this, we need to take a closer look at the mitzvahs of Purim and at the anthropology of food sharing. Why human beings share food with each other. So first of all, in terms of the mitzvot of Purim, we have 4 mitzvot, as we're going to be discussing today. Hopefully you all have 4 pieces of paper. If not, by the end of the morning you should. But we have Mishloach Manot, we have reading the Megillah, we have having the Purim Seuda, and Matanot Le'evyonim, gifts to the poor. Are these mitzvot of Purim ben Adam lamakom, between us and God, or ben Adam lachavero, between human beings and each other? 2 of them are clearly ben Adam lamakom, between human beings and God. Right? Which ones are the ones that are between human beings and God? Sorry? Megillah. Right? You're thanking Hashem for what he did, and the Seuda, right, the Seuda. You're having a feast in order to celebrate what Hashem did. These are mitzvot between us and Hashem.
You could argue about the Seuda.
Right.
Why?
Because you get people together, it's nice to be with your family and your friends.
If I sit down on Purim and I have a sandwich,
You're right.
right, and I thank Hashem at the Seuda, I fulfill the mitzvah. It's beautiful to do it with other people. Right? The Rambam talks about this, others talk about it, welcoming others in. It's a beautiful thing and everybody should do it. But at the core, you fulfill the Seuda solo. So there's no, that may be a benefit when you get others there, but the mitzvah at its core, you and God. Thank Hashem for what happened on Purim. On the other hand, one mitzvah is clearly ben adam lachavero, between one person and another, and that is, of course, matanos le'evyonim, right? Giving needy people money. That's matanos le'evyonim, that's clearly ben adam lachavero. But then you get to shalach manos. Is shalach manos ben adam lamakom or ben adam lachavero? Is it between human being and God or between human beings? Well, it depends. If I take the view of the Trumas Hadeshen that it's about having my meal at which we can thank God, give other people the means of being able to celebrate what Hashem did, then it is Beit Adam L'Makom. It's between man and God. Even though I'm walking to your door and handing you a basket of food, what I'm actually doing is a mitzvah between myself and God. It has all the trappings of a social mitzvah, but it's actually a religious act to God.
Well, that's not necessarily true. You're not necessarily, if that is your reason, then you're not necessarily fulfilling it, because who's to say that that person is going to have a Suda? You can't guarantee that. You can guarantee that.
You can't guarantee anything in life.
You can guarantee that you've given him. You can guarantee that you've given him the food.
Yes, but that's all I have to do. That was the point
that's
that we saw in the Ramah.
But that's where it ends.
Yes, no, that's true.
You're saying you're taking it a step further. Well, if I give him the food, then he'll do this Suda.
With Mark. I'm going to stop you there because I have a half-an-hour limit. You're right. I can't guarantee anything. But my goal is to make sure he has a Seuda, which means it's really about God. That's the Trumas Hadeshen's Ashkenazi framing of what you're doing on Purim. It's about making sure this person is going to have the means to thank God, and then it's up to them to do it. But Rav Alkabeitz is telling us there's another dimension. It is also Bein Adam Lachavero. It's also about how you relate to others, and it's this unity element. And here, I want to talk about why people share food. If we had an hour for this year, we would do this with a discussion, but we don't, so we won't. Some reasons why people share food are purely selfish. There's something that sociologists describe called costly signaling. Costly signaling means you engage in a behavior which costs you something because you benefit by sending off a signal when you engage in that behavior. I brought you in source number 7, the Merriam Turtle Hunters. This is talking about hunters who provide food for the rest of their clan. So they're engaged in costly signaling. It costs them something to hunt for the food and then give it away, but they benefit by sending a message, we are providers. As you see in number 7, signalers, the hunters, gain social and reproductive benefits. Specifically, we find that successful hunters gain social recognition, have an earlier onset of reproduction, achieve higher age-specific reproductive success, gain higher quality mates, who also achieve above average reproductive success. In other words, they do better within the community because they send off a message, we are providers. That's an example of food sharing, which is selfish, right? It's fundamentally self-oriented. You could think of it, of course, not only in terms of the Merriam turtle hunters, but let's say people who give charitably, right? But specifically choose to do it in a way that the world will take note and see what they've done. So they're sharing their resources, but there's a benefit involved in doing so. There are other philosophies of giving that are self-interested. There's a fascinating one in number 8, which is that one gives in order to forestall having other people ask in a way that is going to be uncomfortable. Give to somebody preemptively in order to prevent them from asking you at a time that you don't want them to ask, or in a way that you don't want them to ask. You might look at that as the social welfare system within a state or within a country, saying we're going to provide in order to avoid having to provide in other ways. So this is the way that we're going to choose to help. There are other self-oriented ways to give. There's a fascinating article in number 9 about vampire bats. Did you know that vampire bats share food? You don't think of that. Like, vampires, we usually think of being selfish. The vampire bats actually share food with the neediest vampires. The vampire bats. You take a look at number 9. The vampire bats will starve after 60 bloodless hours, making them unable to maintain a critical body temperature. They need to eat 50 to 100% of their body weight in blood every night. Blood is preferentially donated to bats in critical need, those that would reach minimum weight within 24 hours within a given roost. They will actually share food with each other. What's the idea? So sociologists look at it and say it's what's called risk reduction reciprocity. What it means is, if we create a system which everybody shares with everybody else, then when I need, someone will provide for me. Right? The Gemara in Moed, which I referenced in the heading to number 9, talks about the idea of attending a shiva or a funeral for somebody else, hoping that then when it's one's own turn, the other people will attend theirs. These are self-oriented sharing activities. Other times people share for an ideological purpose. We share food in order to create a community of like-minded people, people who believe in the same things. Take a look at source number 10, please. Researcher Robin Fox quoting Mayor Fortes. Because of its centrality in our lives, food becomes a perfect vehicle for ritual. Food rituals become central to most religions. Food taboos mark off one sect or denomination from another. Modern anthropology tends to stress the usefulness of food as a marker of social boundaries. As the late Mayor Fortes said, it is not so much that food is, quote, good to eat, as that it is good to forbid. Meaning, you delineate who your community is by those who eat the same way, who don't eat the same things, those who eat perhaps at a joint meal. There's an element of using food to identify your like-minded community. Think of the idea of a mezuzah, right? That at the end of a meal, everybody invokes Hashem and thanks Hashem together. You're identifying an ideological community. Korban Pesach will be another example of that. And then you have other times when people share food for the sake of building community. Community with each other. Whether that's filling the needs that a community has, which I brought you in number 11, you can take a look at that later, or whether it's in terms of social bonds by the experience of eating together. You create unity among people when they share food at the same meal. If you take a look at source number 12, this one is important. This is out of South Africa. Nearly 15 years after independence, the specter of apartheid is still painfully apparent in South Africa, yet an exciting new inclusivity is visible in the cultural sphere, particularly in the kitchens of some talented chefs, where the various traditions comprising South Africa's multi-layered cuisine come together. Rainbow cuisine has proved to be more than just a catchy phrase. It has actually impelled change, at least in the culinary arts. The larger question is whether this metaphor can have a wider impact and help shape social behavior. So what they're trying to do is get people to eat together, to share cuisine, and thereby to create community. So that there are lots of reasons to share food with each other. Some of those reasons, the ones we started the list with, are selfish. I want to feed myself, really, and I'm going to give food to others in order to gain that. Others are ideological. I want to share ideals, create a community around those ideals, and share food as part of a ritual that will help create this community of shared ideals. And sometimes it's for the sake of building community, filling the needs of the community, having people build bonds with each other. So the debate between the Trumas Hadeshin and the Manos Halevi, Rabbi Al-Kabates, is really about why we're sharing food on Purim. The Trumas Hadeshin says, share food with each other to make sure that everybody is able to have a Purim Seuda, a Purim meal. You're sharing food to build ideological community. Whereas, Rabbi Al-Kabates is saying, you're doing it in order to build social bonds. Even if you're not going to eat with them at the same meal. The fact that you gave them something and they're going to enjoy it at their table, they're going to eat together, is itself going to build a sense of community. When I lived in Pennsylvania, there was a family that used to send shalach manos. They would make a deli sandwich, like a really nice deli sandwich. They packed with all sorts of good stuff. And I would always have that as part of my seuda, and I would always mention them at the Purim seuda. It's a way to create community. So the Manos Halevi's point is that it is also a ben adam lachavero. It's a social mitzvah as well. We usually take the Manos Halevi's view as obvious today, meaning it was the first idea mentioned here when I talked about why send shalach manos. The first idea mentioned was it's in order to build bonds. If you ask your average person in shul, why do I give gifts of food? It's to build community. But that's actually a big finish. That's a big novelty that the Manos Halevi, that Rabbi Al-Kabates is presenting, but he won. Because if you ask people today, they don't talk about it as providing for someone's seuda, they talk about it as creating friendships. Bottom line for us, looking back at the Misrad HaBriyut, at Israel's health ministry, and their instructions for shalach manos, it is, as the Trumas Hadeshin says, fundamentally providing for other people's meals. So that means the two kinds of food that will help us show our appreciation for God. It means don't send flowers. You can send flowers in addition, but don't make that your core shalach manos. And I think that's what they meant in the health ministry. But the reason for it, the lesson of it, is also this business of building bonds. And so we should pick food which will help people feel close with each other. Which to me means it should be nice, but also the food shouldn't be musar. It shouldn't be rebuked. Don't use shalach manos as an opportunity to instruct people on what they should and should not eat. They try to give people something that you think that they're going to enjoy, that broadcasts a message of caring and affection, and ultimately out of this we will indeed defeat the message of Jews being the Fuzar Meforad, being scattered, and instead we will be a single unified nation which will have Ora v'simcha v'sasan v'ikar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's good.
Rabbi Abby is up next. If anyone doesn't have sheet number 2, the one
Please
for
raise your
Megillah.
hand.
Sorry?
Please raise your hand.
Please raise your hand if you don't have it. Ezer is going to help you get the paper.
It's the Hallel of Megillah. Okay, so please pass those down. Those should be moving down there.
He said, educate them.
Okay. This one for you.
They cannot eat.
This one for just grab anyone. You know, you can take the whole file and test it. Okay, I think we're good.
Sorry. I was talking to somebody here and I just realized I may have presented a false impression on one point and I want to make sure to clarify it. When I talked about the reasons people give, and I mentioned that these are the ones that people will sometimes give for a self-interest, I did not mean at all. And I mean, we want to be very clear. Acknowledging people's tzedakah, including institutions acknowledging it and honoring when people do, is actually a very, very important halacha, and it's a halachic requirement. So I'm not in any way, shape, or form taking away from that. Thank you. It's a very dangerous message.
Morning. Thank you everyone for coming to learn together this morning. And I specifically want to thank Rabbi Frankel, not only for this event, but for helping me get into Canada. You know, without his expertise in immigration, I'm not sure I would be in Canada altogether. So thank you for helping me get in. Rishus Rav Milevsky, Rishus Rabbi Darchiner. So I wanted to speak about the Megillah, and we find in Chazal that the Megillah accomplishes three things. The Megillah, Kriyas HaMegillah, has three different aspects to it. So let's look through the Gemara here in source 1. This is the Gemara Maseches Megillah. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, so Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Chayiv Adam Likrotzes HaMegillah Balayla L'shanosa Bayom. So a person has to read the Megillah at night, and then L'shanosa, we're going to see exactly what this means. It's a little confusing. L'shanosa means to repeat it during the day. Sheneh Maris, the pasuk says, Elokai Yekra Yomam V'lo Sa'aneh V'layla V'lo Dumi Alei. That Elokai, my God, I called out by day and you didn't answer in our time of suffering at that time, during the story of Esther. So we were davening to Hashem, and until Hashem brought about the miracle. So we were calling out to Him by day, V'lo Sa'aneh, and Hashem hadn't yet answered us. V'layla, and we called out by night, V'lo Dumi Ali. The root of the word Dumiyah is like Vayidom Aaron, that Aaron was silent. So it means like silence in like a peaceful way, that I cried out by night and there still was not yet peace for me. In other words, this was over the course of the process of the Megillah, before Hashem brought about the miracle. So we were davening by day and we hadn't yet been answered, and we were davening by night and we hadn't yet been answered. And we'll see Rashi in a minute, but in order to remember that, we read the Megillah both by day and by night. So when the Talmidim heard this, that they were supposed to read the Megillah balayla, ulishanosa bayom, so Savar Mina, they thought what that meant was l'mikriye b'relia, to read the Megillah at night, u'lemisna masnisin dida b'yamama, and to learn the Mishnayos about Megillah during the day. Because the word l'shanosa, even though it could mean to repeat, could also mean like the word Mishnayos, l'shanosa, Mishnayos. So they thought that they were supposed to read the Mishnayos by day. So Amar lahu Rabbi Yirmiyah, so Rabbi Yirmiyah said to the students, L'didi mifreshali minei Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Chia bar Abba. It was explained to me in the name of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Could go into Amri Inchi, as people say, Evor parashas adav asniye, to review the to read the parasha and to review it. So l'krosa, l'shanosa doesn't mean to learn the Mishnayos the next day. It means to read the Megillah and to repeat it. Itmar nami, we have a similar statement. Amar Rabbi Chelbo, Amar Ula b'Ra'a. Chayiv Adam Likrotzes HaMegillah Balayla L'shanosa Bayom. A person has to read the Megillah by night and to repeat it by day. Shenemar, and now the Gemara brings a new pasuk. L'man yizamercha chavod, so that my soul will be able to sing to you. The word chavod is a little tricky, right? Normally it means honor. In this context, it's usually translated as my soul. My soul will be able to sing to you. V'lo yidom, and I won't be silent. Hashem Elokai li'olam odeka. Hashem, my God, I will thank you forever. So we have two different psukim for the source for reading the Megillah, both by day and by night. So Rashi explains here in source 2, U'shanosa bayom, why are we repeating the Megillah by day? Zeicher hanes, as a way to remember the miracle, Shahayu zoakin b'meit tzarasan yom balayla, that at their time of suffering they were screaming out to Hashem, both by day and by night. So the first pasuk that the Gemara quotes tells us that the reason for reading the Megillah twice is a zeicher hanes, in order to remember the miracle. In the second pasuk that the Gemara quotes, Rashi explains here in source 3, Yizamercha chavod bayom, to sing out to Hashem during the day, v'oyidom balayla, to not be silent, rather to sing out to Hashem again at night. V'hai kra, and this pasuk is b'mizmor aromimcha Hashem, is in that parak of Tehillim, aromimcha Hashem ki dirisani, darshinan b'psikta b'mordechai v'Esther v'Haman v'Achashverosh. And the Medrash darshans that whole parak in Tehillim is referring to the story of Purim. Ukriyas Megillah Shevachu. Reading the Megillah is praise. Shemif, how so? How is reading the Megillah praise? Shemif Farsimin as Hanes, it publicizes the miracle. V'hakol mekalsin l'hakadosh baruch hu. And everyone then goes ahead and praises Hashem. So the Gemara brings two different psukim, and Rashi explains that these two different psukim teach us two different ideas about Kriyas HaMegillah. One idea is that it's to remember the miracle, and the other one is in order to remind people of the miracle, to publicize the miracle, so that they'll then go ahead and praise Hashem. And we have a third aspect also of Kriyas HaMegillah that we see in the following Gemara here in source 4. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbana, Arboim u'shmona neviim v'sheva nevios l'snabu lahem Yisrael. There were 48 Nevi'im and 7 Nevi'os who prophesied for the Jewish people. They didn't give us any additional mitzvos. They didn't detract from the mitzvos. Chutz mi mikra Megillah. The only addition was reading the Megillah. They established Purim and they told us to read the Megillah. My Darash, from where did they see that they should establish reading the Megillah? Amar Rabbi Chia bar Av and Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Karfa. If we sing praise to Hashem when we're taken from slavery to freedom by Yetzias Mitzrayim on Pesach, so mimisa l'chaim lo kol shekain, then certainly when our lives themselves were saved, for sure we should sing praise to Hashem. And that's the source, that's where Chazal saw that they should establish the mitzvah of Purim and the mitzvah of reading the Megillah. So the Gemara says, Ihachi halal nami nema. If that's the case, you should also say halal on Purim. How come we don't say halal on Purim? We should sing Shira. The same way we sing Shira and say halal on Pesach, we should sing Shira and say halal on Purim as well. So the Gemara answers, Lefisha ein omrim halal al neisr b'chutz la'aretz. The Gemara gives the first of three answers. We don't say Hallel for a miracle that took place outside of Eretz Yisrael. And the Gemara is about to ask the obvious question. We just learned from Pesach that we should sing Hallel. So Pesach was a miracle that took place outside of the land of Israel. So the Gemara says, Yetzias Mitzrayim, Deneis Shebechutz La'aretz, Heifi Amrinan Shira. Then how can we say Hallel on Pesach? Pesach is also a miracle that took place outside of the land of Israel. So the Gemara answers, Kidetanya, like the Brisa says, Achelo nichnasu Yisrael ha'aretz, before we entered the land of Israel, Huchshuru kol haratzos lomar shira. Then we could sing praise for a miracle that took place anywhere. So Pesach took place before we were brought into the land of Israel. We can say Hallel on Pesach. But once we were brought into the land of Israel, so then we're not going to sing shira, we're not going to say Hallel for a miracle that took place outside of the land of Israel. Once we enter the land, then we can no longer sing Hallel for a miracle that took place outside of Eretz Yisrael. So that's answer one. Answer two, Rav Nachman Amar Kriyasa Zo Halela. The reading of the Megillah is Hallel. Reading the Megillah counts as saying Hallel, and that's the answer that we're going to focus on. So we see a third aspect of Kriyas HaMegillah. Not only is it Zecher L'Neis, to remember the miracle, not only is it Pirsume Nisa, to publicize the miracle, but it's also a form of Hallel. And just to conclude with the third answer of the Gemara, Rava Amar Bishra Mahasam Hallelu Avdei Hashem V'lo Avdei Paro. In the Hallel itself, we say that we praise Hashem, all of the servants of Hashem will praise Hashem, and it's fitting for us to call ourselves the servants of Hashem because we're no longer the servants of Paro. We were taken out of Egypt. But in the case of Purim, Hallelu Avdei Hashem V'lo Avdei Achashverosh, how can we say that we're only the servants of Hashem, and we're not the servants of anyone else, we're not the servants of Achashverosh? It's not true. We're still subject to Persia's rule. We're still subject to Achashverosh. So it wouldn't be fitting to say Hallelu Avdei Hashem as if to imply that we're not avadim of anyone else because we're still avadim of Achashverosh. But what we see from here is that reading the Megillah is considered like saying Hallel. How could reading the Megillah be considered like saying Hallel? Hallel is praising Hashem. Reading the Megillah is just telling a story. So I think the answer is obvious. If you go to someone's house for a meal and the meal is really good and you say, that was a delicious meal, you haven't said, thank you for preparing such a delicious meal. You just made a comment, that was an amazing meal. But that's viewed as a form of praise because it's understood. The implied statement is, thank you for making such a delicious meal. So the same thing by reading the Megillah. When we talk about the wonderful miracle that Hashem performed for us, and we describe how great the miracle was, so that's a form of praise. So Hallel can be, so Kriyas HaMegillah can be a form of Hallel. But what we see here is that there are three different aspects to Kriyas HaMegillah. Zecher L'Neis, right, remembering the miracle, Pirsume Nisa, publicizing the miracle, and Hallel. And what I wanted to learn about was, what's the connection between these three different aspects of the Megillah? Are these three different independent aspects, or do they somehow connect? So I think in order to figure that out, we first need to look at what exactly each one of these aspects are. What is a Zecher L'Neis? What is Pirsume Nisa? And what is Hallel? So in terms of what's a Zecher L'Neis, we have here in source 5, the Gemara frequently talks about a Zecher L'Mikdash. Right? We do something to remember the Beis HaMikdash. What does it mean when we do something to remember the Beis HaMikdash? If we're doing it, we obviously remember the Beis HaMikdash before we started. Right? So we don't need to do it to remember the Beis HaMikdash. We remember the Beis HaMikdash beforehand, and that's why we go ahead and do it. So what exactly is the idea of a Zecher L'Mikdash? So the Gemara says here in source 5, Uminalan davdinan Zecher L'Mikdash. How do we know that we should do something to remember the Mikdash? We should do a Zecher L'Mikdash. The Amar Krak, as the pasuk says, Ki ara ruch harach, that I'll raise up a healing for you. Umimakosayach er po'ech, and I'll heal you from your wounds. N'um Hashem, says Hashem. Ki nidacha karulach, because you were called one who was distanced, who was pushed off. Tzion hi doresh ein la. She is Tzion, there is no one who seeks her out. And the Gemara says, Michal debaya drisha. So we see from here that it's necessary to seek her out, to seek out Tzion, to do a Zecher HaMikdash. So we see from here that the idea of a Zecher HaMikdash is not just to remember the Mikdash, but it's to seek her out, which basically means to show that we care, that she's not alone. She was called one, Tzion was called one who was pushed aside. And we're showing that no, we care. We care. It's not like we've forgotten, we care. So, in the context of Zecher HaMikdash, that means we do something to show that it matters to us, that we no longer have a Beis HaMikdash. And in the context of a Zecher HaNes, remembrance of a miracle, what that would mean is we show that we care about the miracle. So by reading the Megillah, we're not reminding ourselves of the miracle, we know about the miracle beforehand, right? We're preparing for the miracle in advance. We're here learning about Purim a few days before Purim. We obviously remember the miracle. The idea of a Zecher HaNes is not to remind ourselves of the miracle. The idea of a Zecher HaNes is to show that we care about the miracle. What's the idea of Pirsumei Nisa? So the simple explanation is the idea of Pirsumei Nisa, to publicize the miracle, is to let people who don't know about the miracle, let them know that it happened. We're publicizing it, we're letting everyone know. But I think we can see from the following few sources that that's not necessarily the only explanation of Pirsumei Nisa. The Gemara tells us here in Maseches Megillah in Surah 6, Amar Rav, Megillah bizmana korinosa afilu biyachid. When the Megillah is read in its proper time, in its ideal time, the 14th day for those who live in most cities, so that it can be read even by an individual without a minyan. Shelo bizmana ba'asara. If it's read, the Megillah is allowed to be read on other days. If a person lived in a place where they didn't have someone who knew how to read the Megillah and they were going into the nearby town on an earlier day, so they would be allowed to read the Megillah on an earlier day. So if it's not read on the ideal day on the 14th, so then it needs a minyan. But if it's read on the 14th, it does not need a minyan. So Rashi explains here in Surah 7, Bizmana ba'arba'asar, on the 14th. Mitoch shi chova bo bayom al kol yachid v'yachid, since everyone must read the Megillah on that day, it can be read even by an individual without a minyan. Why? Because everyone's reading the Megillah, the Ikka Pirsum Hanes, and there is publicity for the miracle. So what does that mean? Everyone's reading the Megillah today, so I can read it as an individual. I'm not publicizing it to anyone else. I'm not reading it with a minyan, but I can read it as an individual because there is publicity for the miracle. So what does that mean? There are two possibilities for what that means. One possibility is, well, even though I'm not publicizing the miracle to other people, that's not such a big problem because everyone else is. There's a shul where 150 people are reading it over there, so the miracle is being publicized by others. Everyone's reading the Megillah today, so I can read the Megillah to myself and that's fine too. That's one possibility. But another possibility is that even if everyone in the world were just reading the Megillah as an individual, it's not that someone else is taking care of Pirsumei Nisa, that somewhere else there's a shul of 100 people reading the Megillah. It's that since every person is reading the Megillah on their own, the Megillah receives sufficient publicity because each person is, so to speak, taking care of themselves and publicizing, quote-unquote, the miracle. They're not publicizing it to anyone else. So then what exactly is it? So if that's the idea, I think what it would be is that each person is taking their own part in a communal appreciation of the miracle. I can't be publicizing the miracle to myself. I know about it if I'm reading the Megillah. And he also knows about it if he's reading the Megillah. So if we all know about it and we're all reading independently, what are we doing? We're each being a part of a communal appreciation of the miracle. The Shulchan Aruch says here in source 8, Megillah b'yodal u'v'tesvav tzarech lach hazarach asara. Ideally, it should be read with the minyan. Then iyafshir ba'asara, and if that's not possible, korei mosam b'yachid. It can be read as an individual. The Mishnah Berurah says in source 9, b'yodal u'v'tesvav, hainu b'yodal ra'ayoros, the 14th for the cities that are not walled from the time of Yoshua ben Nun, v'tesvav l'mukafin, and the 15th of Adar for cities that are walled. Ritzono lomar, afshuhu bizmana, even though we're reading the Megillah in its ideal day, the ikka pirsumei nisa b'lavachi, and the miracle is being publicized anyways. Shahakol korin ba'osos man, because everyone is reading at that time. Afilu hachi tzarech litzroach u'lekabetz asara, it's still ideal to get together 10 people. Shu b'yeis akriya mishum pirsumei nisa. It's ideal to get 10 people because of Pirsumei Nisa. So I think that line in the Mishnah Brura could be understood in either one of these two ways, either one of these two definitions of Pirsumei Nisa. Is it that I can read it as an individual because some other shul has 100 people and they're taking care of the publicity of the miracle? Or is it because each individual is sort of taking part in their own part of the communal appreciation? So even though I think the Mishnah Brura is vague, it could go either way, when it comes to Hilchos Chanukah, we have a similar idea, and I think the idea in Hilchos Chanukah lends itself more to the second interpretation, that each person is taking their own part in the communal appreciation of the miracle. Just for the sake of time, we'll skip to the Sharat Zion in source 12. Basically what the Mishnah Brura had been discussing is if a person wants to light Neiros Chanukah at a time when no one else will see, everyone in his home is asleep, no one else is walking in the streets, so this person is going to light on his own, does he say a bracha or not? So the Mishnah Brura had said, in the Mishnah Brura the Chavetz Chaim had written that he's not going to say a bracha. But in the Sharat Zion the Mishnah Brura writes as follows, in source 12. Magin Avram, Derech HaChaim, Chayodam, he quotes sources, Uvesefer Chemen Moshe Herich Bazet. Sefer Chemen Moshe expands on this. V'data, when his opinion is, if a person forgot or something beyond his control happened and he didn't yet light the Chanukah candles, Yishnu Kulam, until everyone's already asleep. Yakitz Shtayim Oshosh Mehem Biyadlik, you could wake them up and light Neros. I guess if the people are going to be upset about being woken up, ask your local posek. But let's say you can't wake them up. They're going to be upset and your local posek says not to wake them up. Mikol makom yadlik v'yavarech, you should still light Neiros and say a bracha. The Sharat Zion says say a bracha. There's no one else who's going to see the Neiros. According to the Magen Avram, if you're in a place where there's no one to see, you're not going to make a bracha. We don't find that anywhere in the poskim. On the contrary, even if you're amongst Nachrim, amongst Gentiles, you still light. Isn't that obvious? You still light if you're amongst Gentiles? Aren't we trying to publicize the miracle for other people? Who are we trying to publicize it to if not to publicize it to the Gentiles? Don't we know about the miracle? So it seems like the point of publicizing the miracle is for the Jewish community. And furthermore, it seems that you should write with the bracha. If you can publicize the miracle in front of many people, yoser, in front of more people, if that's better. And then he goes on to say, but if not, don't negate the mitzvah, still write and still make a bracha. At the end, the Mishnah Brura says, Safek brachos lahakel, so don't make a bracha. But from this line, that if a person can write in front of other people, to publicize the lighting of the Chanukah candles in front of many people, that's better. The implication is that there's a value to publicizing the miracle, even if it's not in front of many. But it would still be called and considered publicizing the miracle, even if you're just lighting on your own. And I think from here, both from the fact that the publicity is intended for the Jewish community, and from the fact that the publicity is intended, even if it's not bifnei rabim, it's still called a pirsum hanes. It's still called publicizing the miracle. That the idea of pirsumei nisa is not to let other people know about the miracle, but rather to take our individual part in the communal appreciation of the miracle. So we now have zecher hanes is the personal appreciation of the miracle. Pirsumei nisa is taking our own personal part in the communal appreciation of the miracle. So now let's see what Hallel is. What's Hallel? So the Gemara says here in source 13, V'Hallel zeh mi amaro. Who said Hallel? Who instituted Hallel? Or who instituted that we should say Hallel? A lot of Hallel is broken into Tehillim, but who instituted that we should say it? So Nevi'im shebeinayim tiknu lahenri Yisrael. The prophets from amongst us established that we should say Hallel when? Shu omrim osu al kol perek u'perek v'al kol tzara v'tzara shlo tavu aleim. At any time, whenever any suffering befalls us, when we're redeemed, we sing Hallel over our redemption. And I think a question that we could ask is, why is it phrased, why is the beginning of the formulation of this halacha that, well, when any type of suffering befalls the Jewish people, then when we're redeemed, we sing Hallel. It almost sounds like the suffering is like an integral component of when we say Hallel. I would have said, when we're redeemed, al kol geula u'geula omrim Hallel. On any redemption, we say Hallel. But it sounds like it's saying, on any time that we find ourselves in suffering, in a situation of suffering, then when we're redeemed, that's the time to say Hallel. Being redeemed is like, that's the timing for saying Hallel. But being in the situation of suffering and then being taken out of it are both integral components to when we say the Hallel. The Rabbeinu Yonah in the Rif here in source 14 says that we only say Hallel when we're saved from a situation which affected the entire Jewish people. He says, "V'ikar hatakana lo haisa el b'nei shenaseh lechol Yisrael." It's only for a miracle that affected the entire Jewish people were saved. D'chsev, what's the source for this? The pasuk says, "V'chisavo milchama ba'artzachem." When war will come into your land, that we have to defend ourselves against the enemy that's causing us problems. V'areyosem b'chatotros, we'll blow shofros, we'll blow chatotros, and we'll daven to Hashem and ask Him to save us. So, right? He's trying to say, the point is, we only say Hallel if the miracle happens to all of us, and the source is that if all of us are in a situation of suffering, then we all daven to Hashem. What does that have to do with Hallel? So it sounds like, again, we see that the fact that we were in a situation of suffering, that we were all in danger, that's an integral component to Hallel. And the source for the fact that we only say Hallel when all of us are saved, the entire Jewish people, is from the fact that the Torah says, if we're all in a situation of distress, then we'll call out to Hashem. And then Rabbeinu Yonah goes on to say that even if a miracle is done for an entire community, we won't say Hallel unless it's performed for the entire Jewish people. So why is this? If a miracle is done for an entire community, that's pretty significant. Why doesn't that warrant Hallel? So perhaps you could suggest that Hallel is something which requires two components. It requires both a personal, emotional connection to the miracle, and it requires the magnitude of the entire community, the entire Jewish people being saved. And if the miracle happened to the majority of the Jewish people, but not to all the Jewish people, some people would be lacking that personal, emotional connection. And if the miracle was just performed for one individual, so that would not have sufficient magnitude to warrant saying Hallel. Hallel is only when there's that personal, emotional connection and the magnitude of the entire Jewish people being saved. And in effect, I think what we can say is that Hallel is when two things come together. Hallel is when Zecher L'Nes and Persumei Nisa come together. Zecher L'Nes is a personal appreciation of a miracle. Persumei Nisa is our part in the communal appreciation of the miracle. What warrants saying Hallel? A miracle that was performed for the entire Jewish people. Because then we have both the personal emotional connection, the personal appreciation of the miracle, the Zecher L'Nes, and the Persumei Nisa, the communal appreciation of the miracle. So in effect, all three tie together. The Megillah has three different aspects. It has Zecher L'Nes, it has our personal appreciation, it has Persumei Nisa, the communal appreciation, and it has Hallel. Because by definition, when you have Zecher L'Nes, and when you have Persumei Nisa, what comes out of those two is Hallel. Zecher L'Nes plus Persumei Nisa equals Hallel. There's a famous Ramban at the end of Parashas Bo, which basically expresses this idea very beautifully. The Ramban says here in source 15, "U'lefichach amru have a zayir b'mitzvah kala kevachamura." Chazal tell us in Pirkei Avos we should be as careful with even what seems to be a less significant mitzvah, just like we are by more significant mitzvahs. Shekulan chamudos v'chavivos ma'od, because every mitzvah is so precious and so beloved. Why? Shebechol shah adam moda behen re'rokav. Whenever a person does their own individual mitzvah, any mitzvah throughout the year, that's a form of expressing thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'kavanas kol ha-mitzvos, the purpose of all of the mitzvos, is shanam in beirokenu, that we trust in Hashem, v'nodei rav shu bira'anu, and to thank Him for creating us. V'hi kavanas ha-yetzira, that's the purpose of creation. She'ein lanu ta'am acher b'yitzira harishona, there's no other reason for the original creation of the world. V'ein kel elyon chafetz b'tachtonim milvad sheyeda ha'adam v'yodeh le'rokav she'bera'o. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants for us is that we should thank Him, recognize that He created us, and that we should thank Him for creating us. That's the personal appreciation. That's the Zecher L'Nes, and it's not only on Purim, it's in any mitzvah that we do throughout the year. The kavanas romamus hakol b'tfilos, the purpose of raising our voices in prayer. The kavanas batei haknesios, the purpose of shuls, u'zechus tfilas harabim, and of getting together with the community to daven. Zehu she'yeh b'nei adam, that's so that we should all have a makom yiskabtzu v'yodeh lekel shebera'am. We should have a place where we gather together to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for creating us, v'himtziyam, and creating us. V'yafarsim huzeh, we should publicize it. Publicize it to who? We're all standing in shul. Anyone who's in shul already knows it. It means we're taking our own personal part in the communal appreciation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's creating us and giving us everything that we have. V'yafarsim huzeh v'yomru lefanav b'yosecha anachnu. When you say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're your creations. So I think this upcoming Purim on Thursday, we're going to be reading the Megillah. The Megillah contains these three aspects. And for us, what the Megillah means is thinking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, thinking about the fact that Hashem created us, that Hashem gives us everything that we have, that Hashem performed wondrous miracles for us throughout our history, has kept us alive for generations, has kept our people strong. So we think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu both as individuals, and we think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu collectively as we take our own personal part in this communal appreciation of Persumei Nisa.
Okay, the next cheer will be Matanot Le'Avyonim, more than tzedakah. So if you have that source sheet, you don't need to raise your hand. If you do not have it, I'll be happy to pass some out. Okay. Pass a couple down here. Thank you. Pass a couple more down here. One more. Yep, there should be. Another couple, okay. Okay, I think we're... This is the rest of what we have, so that's up here now. Just before we begin, there also should be sign-in sheets circulating around, so if you have an opportunity to sign your name on them and or sign up for our weekly email, that's fantastic. Yeah. So Bershus, Rabbi Torchiner, Rabbi Avi, and Rabbi Hecht. The mitzvah that I was assigned was Matanot Le'Avyonim, the giving of presents to poor people on Purim. Now, I was always very confused by the nature of this mitzvah. I always thought that it was sort of reminiscent of another mitzvah, that being obviously the regular mitzvah to give charity, to give tzedakah to poor people. That's all year round. And so I decided what I would do for this year was to look a little bit more at whether or not there's a difference and really the interplay between Matanot Le'Avyonim, where we have a special mitzvah on Purim to give poor people some sort of present or money, as well as the regular mitzvah, and between the regular mitzvah of tzedakah, of giving poor people money all year round. And the way I thought that would do that was actually by chiefly looking through one source, and that source is the Rambam, the way Maimonides lays out both the laws of giving charity year round, as well as the special mitzvah of Matanot Le'Avyonim on Purim. So let's begin with the Rambam in source number 1, in his Hilchot Matnot Aniyim, which are, we see the same word of matnot, which is again a gift, to aniyim, to poor people. And he tells us, Mitzvat aseh litin tzedakah la'aniyim, kefi ma shera'ui le'ani. It's a positive commandment to give charity to the poor, according to what is appropriate for the poor person. In this translation here, they added in among the Jewish people, which is a long discussion, as this is certainly not written in the Hebrew text here. The Rambam himself does discuss that later on in this section, and it may possibly be included here, may possibly not be included here. I don't want to get into that too much, although we will briefly discuss it as it pertains to Matanot Le'Avyonim. So, im hayeta yad hanoten maseget, so long, according to what the financial capacity of the donor is as well. Meaning, we try to offer what is appropriate for the poor person based on what the people have to offer for this mitzvah, for the charity. And as the Rambam now quotes 3 different sources in the Torah that tell us to give tzedakah. Number 1, Shenemar patoch tiftach et yadcha lo. Number 1, you shall certainly open your hand to him. Number 2, V'hechezakta bo ger v'toshav acha imach. You shall support him, a stranger and a resident, and they shall live with you. This is the one that's sort of up for debate as to whether it applies to non-Jews as well. And finally, v'chei achicha imach, and your brother shall live with you. Okay, so the Rambam brings us 3 different verses that tell us it's a good idea to support your brother, again, perhaps other people as well, and this is the basis of the regular mitzvah of tzedakah, but it doesn't end there. Rambam continues, V'chol haroeh ani mevakesh, ve'elim einav mimenu. If someone sees a poor person asking for tzedakah, someone comes to you and says, please, I have no money, can you give me something? And the person turns his eyes away from this poor person, v'lo natan lo tzedakah, and does not give him any charity. In that case, avar belo taseh, there's also a negative commandment, as the Torah tells us, shene'emar lo te'ametz et levavcha, v'lo tipotz et yadcha me'achicha ha'evyom. Don't harden your heart or close your hand against your brother, the poor person. So we've got 3 reasons to yes, give charity, and 1 negative commandment, meaning a transgression if someone doesn't give to a poor person who requests from them. So this is the background of the mitzvah of tzedakah in general, but how does this look practically as a mitzvah? So I'll just read some of the English here. We are commanded to give a poor person according to what he lacks. So the mitzvah of tzedakah, let's realize that it's not just about giving someone money or about giving someone food. Whatever the person is lacking, and whatever he may have had before, as we're going to see, is something that falls under that rubric of giving tzedakah. So, if he lacks clothes, we should clothe him. If he lacks household utensils, and even a household, we should purchase them for him. If he is unmarried, we should help him marry. And for an unmarried woman, we should find a husband for her. Right? In all of these cases, these are all included under the Rambam's mitzvah of tzedakah. Whatever is needed for this person, and you are helping provide it for them, that is the mitzvah of tzedakah. And the Rambam goes even further to tell us that even if the personal habit of this poor person was to ride on a horse and to have his servants run before him, then he became impoverished and lost his wealth, we should buy a horse for him to ride and a servant to run before him. And the Rambam tells us that this is implied by a pasuk again in Devarim, which speaks of providing him deimach saro asher yasar lo, enough to fill the lack that he feels, meaning if he originally was of a very high status and now fell from that level, that's what he is lacking, so to say. He used to be here, now he's here, so we've got to fill in that gap for him, and that's part of the mitzvah of tzedakah. You are commanded to fill his lack, but you are not obligated to enrich him, and you don't need to move him above back what he was used to. So this is the first part, really, of the halachos of tzedakah. And it's not just, again, clearly, it's not just about money or food. It's not that if you give someone money, you did tzedakah. If you didn't give someone money, you didn't give tzedakah. It's really about helping them out in any way, either return to a former form, or to simply help them out and whatever they are lacking at that particular time. One other halacha, which is going to be very pertinent to our discussion between this and Purim and the mitzvah of matanot le'avyonim, is the idea of vetting poor people. The Rambam tells us, again, this is finally again, still in chapter 7, still in source number 1, but we're in the last paragraph that we have here. We're in now halacha 6. Ani she'ein makirin oto. If we have a poor person whom we don't know, we don't recognize this person, they're not from around town, ve'amar ra'evani ha'achiluni, and he says, I'm hungry, can you give me some food, please? Ein bodkim acharav shema ramayhu. We do not check into his background to see whether or not he's some sort of deceiving person and he's coming to try to steal money from us. We give him food. Ela mefarnsino to miyad. We immediately provide him with sustenance. However, haya arom ve'amar kasuni. If he was unclothed and he said, cover me up, please. I have no clothing. I need clothing. You can imagine this would be very unnerving. Bodkim acharav shema ramayhu. And actually, in that case, we do check to see whether or not he is a deceiver. Okay? And in that case, it's seemingly because it's a little bit out of the ordinary, we have reason to be suspicious as to what's going on here. And however, obviously, if we know him and we recognize him and we know that this is his situation, and again, if we're familiar with him, we give him the clothing that he needs immediately, and we don't investigate the matter any further. So until now, we've sort of figured out the mitzvah of tzedakah. We figured out its basis in the Torah, and how it's all about providing for other people the needs that they were lacking. And we talked about how that came out within the halachot of not only, again, providing money and food, like we may think of the mitzvah of tzedakah, but really any need that is necessary. And now I thought I would talk a little bit as to how the Rambam expresses the mitzvah of matanot la'evyonim, giving those gifts to the poor people on Purim itself, and how we might notice some differences between the way he presents this particular mitzvah, or perhaps iteration of the mitzvah of tzedakah, and how he presented the general mitzvah of tzedakah that we read earlier. So this comes from the Rambam's Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukah, and it's in chapter 2. It's source number 2 on your source sheets. And Rambam continues. He tells us, he's been talking about the other mitzvot of Purim, and we know, as you've heard earlier on in the earlier shiurim, about 2 of the other mitzvot. Just before this, the mitzvah of Megillah, but prior to that, the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot, of sending, portions from one person to the other. And in that very same verse in the Megillah, it tells us, Mishloach Manot Yishlereyehu Umatanot La'evyonim. It's a very simple, straightforward source. That's what people did because it's written in the Megillah. And tells us further, the Rambam, one is obligated to distribute charity to the poor on the day of Purim. Ein pachot mishnei aniyim, noten lechol echad matana achat o ma'ot o minei tavshil o minei ochlin. Okay, so again, we have to give at the very least 2 people, each have to be given 1 present. And again, this is implied by the pasuk which says gifts to the poor. And what must they be? Tells us the Rambam. They have to be one of 3 things. Either money, ma'ot, 2, minei tavshil, some sort of cooked food, o minei ochlin, some sort of other food. Okay? And this again comes from Shne'emar matanot la'evyonim, gifts to the poor, shtei matanot l'shnei aniyim, 2 gifts to 2 poor people, 1 to each at a very minimum. But these gifts, again, are not simply clothing them or providing what they need. We don't see any mention of that whatsoever. It's to give them some sort of food. Ve'en medaktikin b'ma'ot Purim, and tells us, and the Rambam tells us further, we should not be discriminating in selecting the recipients. Rather, ela kol haposhet yado litol, anyone who sticks out his hand and requests money from us, notnim lo, we give him money. Ve'en meshanin ma'ot Purim l'tzedakah acheret, and we can't use money distributed on Purim for other charitable purposes, meaning if I have money that I'm supposed to be giving to poor people on Purim, I can't say I'd prefer to give it to my local yeshiva, but rather this has to go to the poor people on Purim. However, people do note, many of the commentaries note, that this doesn't apply to the poor person. In theory, as we said during the Mishloach Manot shiur, you can't tell people what to do. There's no guarantee that just because you give someone something, they're going to do what you want with it. If the poor person decides his money shouldn't go towards food, which seems to be the direction that the Rambam is taking, that's okay then. He has the right to do, or she has the right to do, whatever he or she wants with the money that they have been given. So let's talk about a few of the points that we may have noticed that are differences. I'm happy to take comments from the audience at this point as to what might be different between regular standard tzedakah and matanot la'evyonim. Any suggestions? Please.
Seems to have to do with food when they stuff, whereas during the year it's not just food.
Okay, so one point, excellent. The Rambam talks a lot about clothing and household items and restoring him to his previous heights of the wealth that he was used to, and all sorts of other things that are not just food, yet he mentions specifically money or food when it comes to Purim. Why might that be, by the way? Similar to Mishloach Manot, which we discussed an hour ago. Upcoming Suda, something to keep in mind. So that would be one difference that I would highlight. Any other differences that people notice?
time. Tzedakah is an ongoing mitzvah. You give it at any time, but matanot le'evyonim we give specifically on Purim, and it should be given in time that the person could use it.
Excellent. I'm actually going to move ahead to the next source and try to emphasize exactly your point. If you look in source number 3, and we'll return to some of the differences after this, the Ba'er Heitev, one of the commentaries on Shulchan Aruch, writes in Orach Chaim 694, which is all about matanot le'evyonim, V'katvu Bach v'Taz. The Bach and Taz wrote, Afilu ani hamitparnes me'atzdaka chayav. Even a poor person who lives off tzedakah money regularly is obligated to give matanot le'evyonim on Purim. And they note further, Ma she'ein kein bish'ar tzedakah, unlike regular tzedakah, she'eno chayav rak pa'am achat b'shana, which the person is only obligated to give once a year, kidei lekayim mitzvah tzedakah, in order to fulfill his mitzvah of tzedakah, as is written in Yoredeah. And one of the points that he's emphasizing is exactly the point that you just made. Tzedakah is an ongoing mitzvah. There's never a mitzvah of tzedakah that you have to run around trying to find people. I must give to 2 people today. The mitzvah of tzedakah is ongoing when there is a need presented. And when someone comes to you and says, hi, I'm starving, you're not supposed to look away from that. And that was emphasized at the Rambam at the beginning. But here the Rambam's telling us, no, you have to actively seek out 2 people, 2 poor people that you can give this matanot le'evyonim to. That's part of the mitzvah there, so I think that's an excellent difference. Anything else that people may have noticed between, again, the Rambam's general definition of tzedakah and the Rambam's explanation of matanot le'evyonim?
Well, in the general explanation, there seems to be an emphasis on kafi masher rarilan, and also kafi masher chaser ha'ani. There seems to be some sort of evaluation in the context of giving tzedakah year-round. It doesn't seem to deal with that aspect of it in terms of matanot le'evyonim.
Right, so that is lacking. It's true. The evaluation of what the ani was used to is lacking in his description, and that may be related to some of the other differences that we've pointed out in terms of perhaps this being food-focused for some reason. That's a possibility, certainly. I'm going to note one other one, the judgment issue. There are cases where we judge people with regular tzedakah. When we're giving them charity, there are times when we say, you know what, this is a suspicious situation, whereas on Purim we don't do that. On Purim we just sort of are very accepting in that way, and we say anybody who sticks out their hand, we are obligated to give them matanot le'evyonim. So up until now, we've just pointed out these differences. And the main discussion that I'd like to get to in my last 12 minutes or so, maybe 15 minutes, is to try to figure out, is matanot le'evyonim simply a specialized mitzvah of tzedakah that applies on Purim? And these differences are sort of within the realm of tzedakah, but focused on Purim? Or is this an entirely different mitzvah that is distinct and has a very different nature than the mitzvah of tzedakah? And the truth is, this is something that has been discussed by a lot of people. I don't think anything we conclude here is, an absolute rule. There are very many people that discuss this, but I thought I would put out a few of the other halachic points, the points that relate to the actual practice of matanot le'evyonim, and see how they may contrast or work together with tzedakah. On the other hand, to also try to figure out what is special about matanot le'evyonim and why it, even if it is just another iteration of the mitzvah tzedakah, what makes it special. The next point I'd like to talk about is a very practical question that comes up. After telling us in source number 4, Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, after telling us that we are supposed to give food items that are aimed at the Seudah, as we mentioned earlier, is one of the significant differences between the Rambam's discussion of giving out matanot le'evyonim and giving out tzedakah, he tells us the following. It's right after the ellipsis in source number 4. One may not count matanot le'evyonim toward the ma'aser kesafim he owes. There is this idea that we're supposed to, obligated to, depending on circumstances, give 10% of our money, and the details of that halacha I'm certainly not going into now, to charity. And the question comes up, may I use this 10% allotment of what I have towards fulfilling my Matanot LaEvyonim obligation on Purim? And Rabbi Eliezer Malamed Paskins, based on others before him, there's a Maharil which discusses this some 500 years before Rabbi Malamed, and he says one may not count it towards the Maser Ksafim, as one may not fulfill this obligation with money that he is anyways required to give to charity. This is money that would be required to be given to charity anyways, therefore you can't use it for Matanot LaEvyonim. Now thinking this through, if Matanot LaEvyonim is really just charity, obviously there shouldn't be any problem with taking money that's earmarked for charity and giving it to charity. So we do see that, at least in this very detail, there is something different between the two cases. And when we continue, the technical halachic points are fleshed out excellently in the next source by Rabbi Moshe Teragin in his shir on this topic. And he writes in source number 5, "Hitzagnu shtei havanot shonot lemitzvat matanot le'evyonim." We have shown two different understandings of the mitzvah matanot le'evyonim. Efshar lomar, it's possible to say, ki mitzvah zo hi chelek mi mitzvat tzaka hamukeret. It's possible that this mitzvah is part of the regular, recognized mitzvah of tzedakah that we have all year round. Ela shebepurim mitzvat tzedakah chala beofen miuchad. But on Purim, the mitzvah occurs in a unique way. There's something special about the mitzvah of tzedakah on Purim, and therefore we may notice some of these differences. Hashoneh me'aofen shebo anu regilim, and that way that we experience tzedakah on Purim is different than regular tzedakah, and that may account for some of the differences. Lachalufin, on the other hand, efshar lomar ki bepurim yesh mitzvah atzma'it latet kesef lanitzrachim. On the other hand, it's possible to say that on Purim there's an individual mitzvah to give money to the needy. Mitzvah she'ina kshura lemitzvah tzedakah, and this is a mitzvah that is entirely disconnected from the regular mitzvah of giving charity. And he goes on to suggest that this actually may lead to another practical difference in the mitzvah. If we understand this to be regular tzedakah, the minimum amount of matanot le'evyonim that one must give would be 1 pruta, which is a very, very, very small monetary amount. And provided that that minimum amount of money was given, one would actually be mekayim, one would fulfill matanot le'evyonim if they gave that small amount to each of 2 poor people. And this is actually the opinion of the Ritva in Masechet Megillah. On the other hand, what he understands, based on the Rambam, whom we saw, who says they have to be matanot, they have to be presents, they have to be money or food items, they must actually be worth something significant that can move towards buying you some sort of food if it's a monetary gift. And obviously food gifts themselves must be significant. You can't give someone 1 seed or something like that. And he says that would be dependent on whether it is part of the mitzvah of tzedakah, in which case any amount would qualify. You are giving tzedakah as soon as you give any amount. Or if it was something special, in which case that wouldn't work and you'd have to give something more significant, moving towards, again, as we mentioned, the meal aspect and providing food for the needy on Purim. But still, we're at a bit of a loss. Because even if we were to say that it's a different and distinct mitzvah, and it's not connected to the mitzvah of tzedakah, well, how is it different? At the end of the day, we're still supposed to be giving money to poor people to help them out. And this is where I think the Rambam really brings everything together. And I'm going to have the next 2 sources are from the Rambam. One is discussing Purim, and one is actually discussing general holidays, specifically Sukkot, but it applies to the other holidays as well. And here's how the Rambam sums up his discussion of Matanot LaEvyonim. The Rambam writes in there, Halacha 17 in chapter 2 of Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukah, in source number 6 on your pages, Mutav la'adam le'harbot be'matanot la'evyonim, milharbot bis'udato v'shlach manot l're'av. The Rambam tells us if you've got a choice of the 3 mitzvot which involve spending money, Megillah generally doesn't involve spending so much money, but your choices are, you can give mishloach manot, extra mishloach manot, you're going to give a really nice mishloach manot, and you're going to send it to more people. Or you could make a giant Sudat Purim where you have every luxury, under the sun. What a great way to thank God for the miracle that He did. Or you can give more money and more food to poor people. Which should you choose? The Rambam tells us, obviously, it's better to choose the matanot le'avyonim, to give more money out to other people. And why is that? Asks the Rambam. And he actually tells us first what sounds like a little bit what Rabbi Torchiner was talking about again just about an hour ago. Almost a bit of a selfish look at the charity if you read it at first. She'ein sham simcha gdola u'mefuara ela lesameach lev aniyim v'yitomim ve'almanot v'gerim. If we're looking at a day which we're supposed to be happy on, we're supposed to be happy on Purim. What's the best way to stay happy? Is to share with others. To make other people happy will make you happy. That one who makes other people happy, tells us the Rambam, now he moves away from a personal happiness and towards some sort of religious ideal. And he says someone who cheers up, someone who brings joy to people who are less fortunate, that person resembles the Shekhinah, resembles God, so to say. In what way? Shene'amar, and he quotes a pasuk in Yeshaya, Lehachiot ruach shvalim u'lachiot lev nidkaim. That God revives the spirit of the lowly and revives those with broken hearts. And why is it, yes?
Clearly, this special mitzvah is a drabonan.
Yes.
The other are definitely deraisa. Are
Yes.
there any differentials because of that?
There may very well be. What were you suggesting in terms of how the mitzvah would look differently? We don't see any reason to say this is less important. Someone should not give matanot le'avyonim because they can be mekayim the mitzvah of tzedakah more wholesome. It is quite possible, by the way, that even if they are distinct mitzvahs, one is still mekayim a mitzvah of tzedakah by giving matanot le'avyonim. You still may be fulfilling those rules that we saw within the Rambam. If someone is lacking food and you give them food for their Sudas Purim, it's no less of a mitzvah of tzedakah than if you give it to them the following day. So I'm not sure that's significant in terms of the halachic discussion, but it's an excellent point in general, which I should have mentioned earlier. Yes?
During Chakim, before Shabbat, there are people who are dressed from Jews or probably impersonators and not Jewish at all. What do you do when these people have their hand down there? They've got their 7 children and they want food and they're representing themselves as Jewish people. They're saying Shabbos to you, Chag Sameach, but yet you know that you're not Jewish.
So this would fall under the practical rulings that the Rambam delineated in general about the mitzvah of tzedakah, and when exactly you're required to check into someone's motives is a significant question that has to be asked to a particular, rabbi, to your rabbi. The simple reading, though, of the Rambam, the way it was presented for the mitzvah of tzedakah, and not even as matanot le'avyonim. Matanot le'avyonim would be even more generous, where we generally don't look into people at all. But the way the Rambam presented it is someone asks you for food, then you should give them. You don't need to check into them. Certainly the difference between Jews and non-Jews is something bigger than what we can discuss today. But you can see actually there's a lot of discussion as to why is it that we give tzedakah to non-Jews, and not only are permitted, but perhaps, according to some, under certain circumstances, obligated to give money to non-Jews as well.
One quick point, one quick question. The point is that if they were another differentiation is night versus night and day. Matanot le'avyonim is restricted to the day, but the question is, since we've said that you can give it through food, can you get it to second base by giving food gifts to the poor by doing both mitzvahs at once?
That's a very good question. I remember hearing something about that once, but I don't remember anything about it now. That should have been something that I looked into. I do want to resume, though, quickly our discussion of not just a selfish type of, I want to have the most joy on Purim, so I'm going to do this mitzvah, but the Rambam now turns this and says that someone who does extra when it comes to matanot le'avyonim is similar to the Shekhinah, similar to the God, to God, and he chooses this verse from Yeshaya saying that God revives the spirit of the lowly and revives those with broken hearts. Now, if I was the Rambam, I might not have chosen that particular verse. That verse is talking about making people happy. Why not say God provides sustenance for the needy or something like that? You can say I'm like God in that way. So, there's a poor person who needs food, and I'm providing it for them. Maybe that's how I'm like God. Why is it specifically about reviving the spirit of the lowly and reviving those with broken hearts? And that's because, as you can see from source number 7, and as you can see from elsewhere, That's what it's really about. I believe the mitzvah of Matanot Le'Evyonim is different than tzedakah in that it's not about providing 100% the needs of another person. If you give clothing on Purim to a poor person, you're providing their needs. But that may not be the mitzvah of Matanot Le'Evyonim. And the reason for that is because on Purim it's about making other people happy. The verse that we quote about Hashem is that He is helping out others, and that's what's reviving their spirit. There's a certain emotional need that you're fulfilling by inviting someone to your Seudah and giving them food for their Seudah and for their meal on Purim. You are not only doing something by giving them money, but you are making them feel a part of this Yom Tov. You are bringing them into that, and that's reviving their spirit. That's reviving their broken hearts. Yes, tomorrow they may need some more food. They may need some more clothing. They may need some more shelter. And there's a mitzvah of tzedakah to cover that. But on Purim, it's all about bringing people in, including them in your celebration, allowing them to rejoice just like anybody else on the day of Purim. On the day of Purim, for someone who's poor, it's no different than anybody else. They too can celebrate and don't have to be thinking they're sadly looking at an empty table and saying, I wish I was able to celebrate on Purim. And this is also expressed in general Hilchot Yom Tov when we're told, V'samachta v'chagecha, that it's not about being happy. As the Rambam writes there, don't think that we're just doing things in order to make people happy. Don't think that there's a mitzvah of being happy and say that, you know what, I can fulfill my Seudas Purim and that will make me very happy. That's not what it's about. Such a happiness, it's true, exists. But the Rambam writes in source number 7 that that's not a real happiness. Or even if it is a real happiness, it's not the type of happiness that the Torah wants you to have. The Torah wants you to invite in people from the outside, those who are needy, those who are less fortunate, and people who don't do that and simply say, well, I'm being a big tzaddik, I'm having such a big meal by myself, that's someone who God rejects. But rather, the point is to include everybody else in the simcha of Purim and to allow them to rejoice on their holiday, and that is the true mitzvah of Matanot Le'Evyonim. Thank you very, very much again to the shul and for all of you, and our next speaker will be Rabbi Haft on Seudat Purim.
I noticed that my source sheet has Shemos, so for those who want, you can leave it here and I'll take care of the Geniza afterwards.
Yes, the last one. Does anybody have a copy of Rabbi Haft's source sheet? It should have been sitting in a pile here. There should have been a pile there with all the source sheets. The blockery.
When the weather gets warmer.
Anybody need the last one? Yeah, yes, I'm going to try it. Okay, who on this side needs for the last year? Perfect. Yes, I thought I sent an extra one. Here you go. One needs here, one needs. Okay.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out a couple days before Purim to learn Torah together. So I will be talking about the Seudas Purim, the Purim meal, the butcher your dignity. And I just want to make a disclaimer before I start. In this year, I intend to discuss some of the halachic and philosophical ideas behind the Purim Seudah in general, and drinking on Purim in particular. But the shir is only intended to speak about these concepts philosophically and in theory, but is not in any way meant to offer practical advice about what someone should do. And that, of course, is something that one should consult their rabbis, mentors, loved ones, and anyone else. So, as we saw, there are 4 mitzvos of Purim. 3 of them actually apply during the day, and this mitzvah, the mitzvah to have a Purim meal, is sourced in the 9th chapter of Megillah Esther. If you look at source 1, it says, Kayomim asher nachu bahem haYehudim be'oivehem, as the days on which the Jews gained relief from their enemies. V'chodesh asher nepach lahem biyagon l'simcha, and the month which had turned about for them from one of sorrow to gladness, ume'evel yom tov, from mourning to a holiday, lasososav yemei mishta v'simcha. In order to celebrate this whole overturning of the negative decree to one of a positive decree, so one celebrates by having a festive meal, mishta and simcha. So what is the nature of this festive meal? So the Gemara tells us, first it tells us a ruling and then it tells us a story. The Gemara in Megillah in source 2 says, Amar Rava, Mechayev inish lebesume bepuria adelo yada ben aruch Haman levarach Mordechai. It says a person should be besume. The commentaries explain. Rashi says besume is lishtaker biyayin, that he should become intoxicated with wine. Adelo yada ben aruch Haman levarach Mordechai, until he doesn't know the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai. Just to note, we don't have a particular amount or blood alcohol level that is telling us, and on our sources, as we see further, it may not be so clear what the extent of the drinking is. Actually, my daughter is 2 years old, and now she's learning about the holidays, so we tried to find a Purim mix for kids, and this song, Adelo Yada, was #1 on the playlist. So it is really one of the primary themes of the day. Now we have a story. Zori says, Rabba v'Rabbi Zera abdu sudas Purim b'hadi adadi. Rabba and Rabbi Zera, two of the Talmudic sages, had a Purim Suda together. Come Rabba shakte Rabbi Zera. Rabba maybe had a little bit too much to drink, and he came and literally he slaughtered his friend Rabbi Zera. L'machar b'yirachmanav. The next day, Rabba prayed and he was granted mercy, and his friend Rabbi Zera came back to life. We'll see, at least on a simple level, it seems the Gemara is saying that he killed him and he brought him back to life. We are told that the Talmudic sages were able to do things that we're not able to do, but then we can see some commentaries about what exactly that may mean. The Shana Amar Lei, the next year they said, Naisi B'Navi Sudas Purim B'Hadi Adadi. Rabbi gave him an invitation again. It was so fun last year, come back this year. Amar Lei, Rav Zera said, V'chol Shaita V'Shaita Izrachish Nisa. We can't rely on these miracles every year. And just another note about when this Sudas Purim should be, when we speak about Adelo Yada, that level of intoxication, Sudas Purim she'achlo b'layla lo yatsa yidei chobaso. So a Sudas Purim, a Purim meal that one has at night, one does not fulfill this obligation. So it sounds like any discussion about drinking on Purim only applies to the day meal. So my taima yemei mishta v'simcha ksiv. It says yemei mishta v'simcha and not at night. As far as how to understand the story, so there are those who understand it literally. The Marsha, Rav Shmuel Idols, in source 3, commenting on this Gemara, he says, Davar tamua hu levarsho kepashte. He says it's difficult to explain this story on its simple meaning, even though the sages may have had some ability to do that. The Ratzulomar ke'ein shakte gabre chamra v'gvia lishtos Yoser midai achakala v'natalamus. That rather what happened, Rab encouraged Reb Zera to drink a lot. He became very sick and almost to the point, of death, but he drank too much. So a question that seems to be glaring is you have this ruling of Rabbah, who says, it's one ruling, we know that in the Talmud, one ruling, it may not mean that it's necessarily conclusive or the bottom line halacha. You have this ruling of Rabbah, who says that a person is obligated to get to this level of intoxication. And then you have the story, which seems to illustrate that this is like a disaster. Right? It doesn't sound like something, even from the Gemara's perspective, it doesn't sound like something that's desirable. So the question that the commentaries notice and struggle with, is the story meant to confirm the ruling? Or is it meant to say, maybe the ruling's not like Rava, because you see what happens when we take it to that level. So I'm just wondering, what does the crowd here think? The story to confirm it, or the story to show this is something you shouldn't do? Yep.
I think it's something it's saying you shouldn't do.
You shouldn't do that, because if you do it, then your chavrusa may sheft you. So maybe it sounds like it says, Rava says it's ruling, and then we have someone, whether it's literally that was killed, or whether it's that the Marsha says he became so sick. But so it sounds like following on this ruling, it may say, not so fast. It may not be something that will work out well. Anyone thinks that the opposite, that it may confirm the ruling? So we think that it shows that it's not a good idea. Yes?
Well, I mean, it doesn't say anywhere in that story that it shouldn't be done. It just said they didn't want to do it with people that they didn't.
Right. You have to know who else is at your suda. But it certainly does not say that it shouldn't be done. Yes?
It has to be done in the day. At the end it says, Rabbi says, a Purim feast in the night you don't fulfill it. So whether you have a problem or you don't, or you have some whatever, regardless, it can't be done at night. Well, if you did it at night, you sleep it off maybe, but you can't do that.
Right. This was something I assume that their Purim Suda took place during the day, because that's when this whole discussion of drinking during the meal happens. So the question is the story confirming Rava's ruling, or is it coming to say it's not good? Yes?
Rashi says it's shtakir b'yayin.
Right.
Most people who get drunk do not die. So the ruling isn't that you should drink till you're going to get to the point that you're going to die. It's just to the point that you get drunk. Most people get drunk, don't die. So.
Right. So maybe this was an exception. Maybe this was telling you there's a certain level that's maybe too much. The interesting thing is Rava invited him back.
It's not confirming, it's not denying, it's just saying this is the mitzvah, but be careful with it. Just like when you do B'dikat Chametz, you always see these warnings, and don't burn your house down.
Right. That could be. And so you see that the commentaries take different approaches. There is an opinion, it's quoted by the Baal HaMor, this is source number 4, Rav Ephraim ben Shimshon. He quotes an opinion of Rabbeinu Ephraim, who says that this law does not follow the opinion of Rava, the Leis Hilchas Hakov Haseh, and he says, "V'lav shapir damei lemeved hachi," and that it's not good to do like this ruling, because he reads the Gemara that you have this ruling, but then you have this story, and maybe it shows that maybe we don't follow this ruling. So that is one line of thought, and it is brought by some of the later authorities. However, if we look at some also significant authorities, we see the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, they in fact do confirm this ruling. If you look at source 5, the Rambam says in the Laws of Megillah, Keitzad Chovas Eida Zo, how does one fulfill the obligation of the Purim meal? Sheyochol basar v'yisaken zeda no'eh, you kifi asher timsei yado, you make a meal with meat to the extent that you're able to afford. So he is saying this is all in the context of a meal. V'shose yayin ad shishtaker de'rodem v'shifruso. You drink wine until you get so drunk and you fall asleep out of drunkenness. So it sounds like he's going with the Agala Yada ruling. Additionally, the Shulchan Aruch in source 6, he says, Sudas Purim Shenasa V'Lailo Yotza Yidei Chavaso. So again, we say that the obligation of the meal, and really by extension any discussion of drinking, is only relevant during the day. But the Ramah says, Mikol Makom B'Laila Yiznak V'Yir B'Ktsas B'Suda. At night, the Ramah says one should have some sort of meals, partake in some sort of festivities, but this is clearly not the meal when there is any discussion of getting intoxicated to that extent.
Can I just clarify, when we say at night, do we mean after the first Megillah reading?
Oh, very good question. That's very important. At night is well, really on both ends, but in this context, it's referring to the night after Megillah readings. So that would be Wednesday night.
Right.
It's also important to note that the Shulchan Aruch says that one should have the majority of their meal. Let's say on Thursday, one should have at least the majority of their meal before nightfall on that day, because they
become drunk at that point before night.
I'm sorry.
And then become drunk in the day before night.
Before night, right? If whatever happens during the Suda, that should be done. That the majority of that time is during the day. If you turn your sheets over, this is a continuation of the Shulchan Aruch in Sif Beis in the second section. It says, "Chai v'nish lebesume v'porio ad lo yada ben ar harman levarach Mordechai." Again, the Shulchan Aruch, more of a final authority, says that one brings this ruling of Rava that one should get drunk until he doesn't know the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai. The Rama says, that one doesn't need to get so shikar, he should just drink yoser milimudo more than he is accustomed. It also, yoser milimudo can also mean more than his learning. So there's a story by one of the, anyway. But at a simple level, it means he should drink more than he is accustomed to, but doesn't need to get so drunk. And he has a compromise, or rather, he says in reality that someone could drink a little bit, and then what's a way that you really don't know the difference between Ar Haman and Baruch Mordechai when you're asleep? And he said that would accomplish any requirement of this mandate, or this idea of not knowing the difference between Ar Haman, cursed is Haman, and Baruch Mordechai. And the end of this, I think, is a very, very important point. If not the most important takeaway is that whatever it is at the end of the day, we're not necessarily talking about amounts or the shiurim that we have in other halakhic measurements or level of intoxication. Really, the most important thing, the bottom line, is whether someone drinks more, determines that within their situation that it would be appropriate to do something, drinks more, drinks less. The main thing is that it has to be l'shamayim. It has to be for what the su'uda, and maybe what the drinking within that, is trying to accomplish. So that way, so I want to take a look at what exactly it is trying to accomplish. In Surah 7, the Ber Halacha says, just to clarify what Purim and what the Sudas Purim is not supposed to be, he says, Einanu Mitzaved Lishtaker Lubakas Atzmeinu B'nitoch HaSimcha Sholin Tzavinu Al Simcha Zeb Halos B'Shel Shtos. That someone shouldn't, we're not commanded to become so drunk and demean ourselves from our rejoicing. And we're not commanded to rejoice, we're not commanded to have a Mishnah B'Simcha, but it's not meant to be for the sake of debauchery and stupidity. So I think as part one of the question, so it's not supposed to be debauchery. Rather, we should rejoice with the delight that leads us to love God and acknowledge the miracles He has done for us. So with the one who does more, one who does less, that's the goal we're aiming for. So furthermore, what are we meant to accomplish? So far we looked at more strictly halakhic sources, but now I want to take a look at some of the more philosophical sources. The Maharal of Prague in source 8 says, that in the days of Haman, he wanted to obliterate Israel and destroy their bodies. And it was clear that at the end of the day, they had no help other than from Hashem. That we have to recognize the fact that we're considered nothing and our whole existence is based on, is sustained by Hashem. Ve'az ein davar ba'adam kasher ein ha'adam nechshav l'chlum kiyumo hu min Hashem. That, and the function of this intoxication is that when someone is intoxicated, when someone is in a certain compromised state, so that person becomes more vulnerable. He's able to do less things, that there's a certain feeling or a certain really reality of vulnerability, that he's less in charge. And this is something, explains the Maharal, that is a goal of Purim and is a way that we can really appreciate what the miracle of Purim was. That we were powerless, we didn't have any salvation, and then Hashem saved us, and that is the only reason why we are here. So perhaps drinking is a way of accomplishing that. The Nesiva Shalom in source 9, the Slon Rebbe, says, "The lo amru lebesume biyayin ela bepuria." Right? You turn your sheets over. What does the Gemara say? L'chayin ish lebesume bepuria. Someone is required to be intoxicated on Purim, or with Purim. It's part of an idea of being drunk but not from wine. That we're supposed to be meant to be drunk, intoxicated, moved by the elevated revelations on Purim. In the perspective of Achas B'Shana, that's referring to getting atonement once a year on Yom Kippur. He continues, L'shleimus avodas Hashem koleles shalem im boro, shalem im chavero, v'shalem im atzmo. That perfection in the service of God includes our relationship with God, our relationship with other people, and our relationship with ourselves. And with all of these types of relationships, there's an aspect of cursed is Haman and Baruch and blessed is Mordechai, certain things that either encourage us and weigh us down, certain ways that we're inclined towards good, certain ways that we're inclined towards things that are negative. And in all these areas, these are all parts of Avodas Hashem and all part of our mission as a Jew. Therefore, Asher Chayev Inish Lebesume Yiporia Mikdushas Hayom Ad Lo Yada Ben Ar Haman Lebarach Mordechai. And within those things that we're meant, these relationships that we're meant to cultivate, but sometimes have things that weigh us down, we should be intoxicated, he's saying, by the holiness of the day, so that someone is not weighed down by these types of challenges. Yes?
I don't understand the concept, because Rava is saying that we shouldn't be able to tell a distinction between Mordechai and Haman.
Right.
But the whole purpose of the holiday is to distinguish between the two. We have to know what evil is and we have to know what good is. So I don't understand Rava's original concept, and the Maharal's explanation that by getting drunk you feel vulnerable and powerless, so therefore more dependent on God. But that's got nothing to do with not distinguishing between Mordechai and Haman. So I still don't understand the point of Rava in the first place.
Excellent question. I would propose that perhaps the idea is that of course we want to know the difference between good and evil, even the way there could be somewhat of a paradox, because even the way we were meant to enjoy it is a way that we're not supposed to engage in debauchery. What I would suggest is in source 1, the verse says, Yemei Mishta V'Simcha, that maybe we're so happy by the miracles that happen, and maybe that's the focus, and that understanding the salvation, that's less a matter of not understanding good and evil, but maybe an emphasis on the amount of simcha that we're meant to have. That's what I would propose.
That you can understand it figuratively, not literally.
And I think to a large extent it is.
So it's, you are drawn to the point that something as significant as differentiating between good and evil is no longer existing.
Right.
Why not?
Well, because it's describing the drinking, not the fact that you would lose your decision between good and evil.
Then maybe, right, then maybe I think it's an excellent question. I do think it's figurative, and I'll say for the reason because, as we saw, one is not allowed to act in a way that's debauchery. We saw that clear, so it can't be that we get to that type of level, but I think it could perhaps be that the level of enjoyment, of celebration, is one that maybe we're not supposed to be as focused, or even for a few moments forget about those things which may make us unhappy.
The commentary on Rabbah indicates that this could easily get out of control and ended up so that the two men separated the following Purim and did not celebrate together for fear of a disaster. Indicates a kind of restriction on that comment by Rabbah.
Right, and that's maybe where some, like the Rabbeinu Ephraim, say that this story is supposed to illustrate what we're not supposed to do. Mm-hmm. But again, it's a very, very good question. And it also it's very consistent with what exactly is the goal. So the Nesiva Shalom continues that this person is supposed to get so intoxicated by the holiest of the day that he doesn't, that he's not bogged down, he's not focused on those things that weigh him down. And he says, what should be our goal on Purim? The second to last line of the Hebrew. Yisha behapurim simcha atzuma ad sheyargish belibo she'ein kol hebdel beina itim shebehem hu margish as atzmo karov l'Hashem yizbarach. He should get so full of, should he draw out these simcha of Purim until you feel in your heart that you lose sight of the times when you feel that you're close to Hashem. Lebeina itim shebehem margish. And the times that you feel distant and pushed off. And Purim provides such an opportunity where you realize the reality that Hashem is in charge and that you should be able to, and is such an effect, and there's such an atmosphere of simcha, and one should draw that to lose sight of the times when a person feels distant. In source 10, close the Sifsei Chaim, or Chaim Friedlander says, Sudas Purim Badarasa la'akeres kulam b'lismoach b'tzavzei ish im re'ehu. That the aim of the Purim meal is to unify everyone, and for everyone in the group to bring happiness to his friend. Ve'al yedei zeh manchilim d'doros es ha'kabbalah ha'mechudeshes b'yamim mahem ki ish echad b'lev echad. And through this, we pass on to the future generations the reacceptance of the Torah. That reacceptance, which we're told out of love, was done in the days of Mordechai and Esther, like one man with one heart. And again, it's a good question, what about Rabban or Zerah? Because it seems like they were still friends, but you have to know who you're celebrating with. And I think that from what we've seen, drinking can, and sometimes does accomplish this. Our inhibitions are down. Maybe we are more, we act in a more festive way than we may otherwise. Of course, on the other end, there are ways in which drinking, especially drinking excessively, can do the opposite and take a real toll on relationships. So I think what we take away from this, at least from the learning part, and not in the practical part, is whatever anyone does and determines is best for them. But like the Shulchan Aruch says, like the Ramah says, "Echad marbe echad hamamit u'bivad sheikaven libo l'shamayim." Whatever we do, our goal should be l'shem shamayim. It should be for the purpose of appreciating that everything we have is from Hashem and all the miracles that happened at Purim, and of increasing friendship. And with that, I wish everyone a very Purim Sameach. Purim is really, really a very special time, and we should certainly get drunk on Purim.
Thank you very much. Thank you again to Bnai Torah for hosting. Thank you everybody for coming out on a Sunday morning close to Purim. It has been noted there is quite a bit of food still in the hallway. Please take advantage of it. Okay, thank you very much. Purim Sameach.
Two answers for you. One, a very historical, technical, academic answer, and the other, a very Hasidic answer. The way that the Mass is generally portrayed